Tom Campbell here. If you find something of significant value in our videos, please consider supporting their production through our Patreon account or through a one-time donation. The links are in the description below. Thank you and enjoy the video.
Good afternoon, Tom. Thank you for being here for this Tom Campbell Answers Your Questions series. We have some new website questions submitted, and the first one comes from Sharifi. She says, "Hello, Tom. I'm watching your YouTube channel for the last few months, and I have this question. While I was watching your workshop in Calgary 2016, when you say learning is cumulative thing, and when you say that we reincarnate without bringing back our memory, so how does this consciousness learn from past lives in order to grow?"
Okay, well, the learning is not intellectual. Where you're stuck is thinking that learning is an intellectual process. And without the intellect, how could you possibly learn? This learning I'm talking about is the learning of growing up, the learning of evolution. How did single-celled things learn how to be multi-celled things? How did multi-celled things, learn how to be fish and rabbits and eventually people? How did it learn that? So it's not an intellectual learning. When you grow up, your growth has some intellectual learning in it. You go to school and you learn how to do math, you learn history, you learn things. But it's not the facts you have in your head that makes you grown up. Growing up has to do with how you see the world, how self-centered you are, how considerate you are, how you interact with other people. There's a lot of things there, and that is not intellectual learning. Well, yes, we do learn how to be polite, say yes, ma'am, no, ma'am, thank you, please, and this sort of thing. And some of that is learned, but that's acting. Okay, you can act more civilized if you apply all those things you learn, but acting is not the same as being. There's a big difference between acting kind and being kind, or acting polite and being polite. And the learning I'm talking about is the being type of learning. It's the evolution of the quality of your consciousness. When I talk about learning through multiple lifetimes, I'm talking about learning how to become love, learning how to evolve the quality of your consciousness. So it's not an intellectual thing. It doesn't require intellectual information. What it requires is for you to make choices, better choices. In my book, I describe it as pulling yourself up by your bootstraps. Well, that's kind of an inside joke in physics. You can't pull yourself up by your bootstraps, but that little phrase has been coined for those things that you grow into rather than intellectually think your way through. In other words, let's say being an athlete. What you want to do is run a marathon, run for 20 miles without stopping. Well, most of us couldn't just do that. But all of us, if we trained for it, could do that. Maybe we wouldn't win. Maybe we would be, a long time coming across the finish line. But if we trained, we could do that. It might take us a year or 2 years to do it, but we could condition our body to be able to do that feat. So that's what I mean by growing, changing yourself. You don't just do it intellectually. You can read all the books about running marathons that you like, and that won't help. It's not intellectual. It's something you have to grow into. It's the same thing. When you're 10 years old, you could read a book about being an adult, but it's not going to help. You have to grow up. You have to be it. You can't do it intellectually. And you can read all sorts of books about being kinder and gentler and caring and becoming love and being kind and considerate and compassionate, but that won't help at all. You need to be those things, not act in those ways. We're not talking about behavior here. Behavior can be modified by the intellect, but who you actually are inside is not an intellectual process. It's just who you are. So that's what I'm talking about when I'm talking about growing up. And that's why we don't need the intellect. Now, how do we grow and get better? Well, if we go through a lifetime and we make good choices, and therefore we evolve the quality of our consciousness, the next time we get to start with that quality of consciousness that we just earned. That's what we start with. And if we make a lot of really poor choices and we de-evolve, next time we get to start with that de-evolved quality of consciousness, because that's what we've earned, you see. So you learn by making choices, by being, and the quality of that being is what you're changing. You're growing the quality of your consciousness, and that's not an intellectual thing. Actually, if you allowed the intellectual data in, it would ruin the process, because now people would be trying to act that way, get the right answer. They'd game the process. Oh, the point of me being here is to be kind and gentle and considerate of others. All right, then I'll act that way. Well, that doesn't help. Matter of fact, that probably gets in the way of you actually being that way, because you think that you're doing it. You're doing what you should be doing. You're acting it correctly. Well, that doesn't help at all. You won't grow up even a little bit doing that. So you really have to change who you are to grow up this way, not change the facts in your head or change your knowledge base any. So we don't want people to come with all that memory, because they just try to game the system. They'd become actors. They wouldn't be focused on being, and they would be terribly burdened by all that information. You would have, let's say, after 10,000 incarnations, you would have probably, at least 10,000 spouses, probably, 20, 30, 40,000 children. I don't know how many, maybe 50 or 60,000 grandchildren, and these would all be no doubt very dear to your heart. People that you just, would like to spend all the rest of your life with. Well, you can't spend all the rest of your life with, 60 or 70,000 people that you all just, love to death. It doesn't work that way. You have to let that go. It would just be too much to deal with if you came back with all of that memory intact. So we don't want people to gain the situation. We don't want them to be overburdened with intellectual stuff, because we don't want them to game the system. So that's why I talk about learning in a way that is different than intellectual learning. It's growing.
Quality. Yeah, it's a quality. And I could see why it explains a lot why people who are in very dire circumstances, very hard circumstances, how their quality shines through. And that's because that consciousness is evolved, that they've evolved a being level such that any circumstance that they are in, they shine through, they work through it. That makes that part easy to understand. And it is also easy to understand how you cannot be, since this is a learning process, you cannot be attached to all of the lifetimes you're in. It is for learning, and it is for evolving towards love. And in that sense, that brings a new light, I think, to why we have to keep learning through reincarnation.
Yeah, well, each experience packet, as I call it, instead of reincarnation, I use the word experience packet, just because some people have emotional issues with words like reincarnation. So in each experience packet, you just are, you act, you make choices, because that's who you are. That's how you are. That's the core of you. That's you at the being level. And that's exactly what you're supposed to do, is make those choices and then look at those choices and say, oh, should I have done that better? How could I have done that better? And that's how you evolve. And we don't want people to you don't want your students to look at the test before you give them the test, because then the test is no longer a valuable measure of what they know. It's the same sort of thing. If everybody says, oh, I'm supposed to act like this, well, now they'll do well on the test, but it won't have any effect. The test will have nothing to do with what they know. It won't help them know anything more. So it's that sort of thing.
So it's kind of like whoever you are, wherever you are, there you are, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
It's just you. So you make the choices because that's how you are. And then you get the ramifications of those choices. You get the consequences of those choices. And then you look at those consequences and decide how you could do it better. How
and
could you grow up?
you want to take this on seriously, because de-evolving, continuing to make bad choices or disregard or not acknowledge others and extending out to others has a serious downside. It makes the next life experience packet more difficult, more and more difficult.
Sure. Yeah, well, that might fall under the heading of karma. Karma is not a punishment, and it's not a tit for tat. You did this, now this has to be done to you. It's just simply the concept that if you don't grow, then you just get another chance. And if you do it wrong, then you're a little further back than what you were before. If you de-evolve, now you've just kind of dug a hole for yourself. Now you have to evolve just to get back to where you were, besides making more progress than where you were. So that's really what karma is that there's no free lunch. Nobody gets a pass just because they tried. You have to actually grow up, and you get as long as it takes you. That's how much time you have. You have as long as it takes to grow up. So if you can grow up in a lifetime, well, good for you. If you grow up in 10,000 lifetimes, well, that's good for you too. It's whatever it takes. So yes, it is serious. If you make very poor choices, you just set yourself back on this path. And that means you will have to make more better choices, to get back to where you were, and then even more better choices to keep evolving past that point. So it's just the nature of evolution, is that you can evolve and you can de-evolve.
Well, this concept of evolving and continuing to learn and experience life experience packets is part of your theory. It's a necessary part of your theory of everything.
Mm-hmm.
Is that right?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. I did not add multiple experience packets or reincarnation because I thought that was a cool idea, and I read about it, or people think it's nifty, or it's it's a fashion in the East. None of those things was why I came to it. I came to it because it was logically necessary for the model to work. Because as the person mentions, learning has to be a serial process. It can't be a parallel process. You have to learn all about A before you can begin to understand B. And then you have to learn all about B before you can begin to understand C. And it's not like you can just suddenly know everything. Learning is a step-by-step serial process. And changing yourself, becoming different, becoming a person of love, of caring, letting go of self-centeredness, that is not an easy thing to do. Just like walking, running a marathon is not an easy thing to do. It takes focus, it takes practice, it takes effort, and if you don't work at it, it won't happen. So
I think
that's,
you may be the only one who has put logic to the concept of past lives. past life experiences, because of the way you view our reality, because of you making the analogy of this reality to a social system that
Mhm.
is lowering its entropy.
Mhm. Yeah, well, and the incarnation, or multiple lives concept, is necessary. Like I say, it's just a logical step. You can't get to where we are from where we started if you don't have that. So it's not a belief. It's just part of the logic of the theory that it's necessary. So I come from a very different place. Eastern philosophy has that concept running through it. A lot of other indigenous people, old cultures, have that concept. Often their connection to past lives is through ancestors. They have connections to their ancestors. But in any case, that's more religion and philosophy, and what I do is science.
Mm-hmm.
So I do it because it's logically necessary.
Thank you, Tom. Our next question comes from Pete. He's in the United Kingdom. I'm a 49-year-old Brit, and despite considerable efforts to attain right life, it's been an arduous journey due to complications with a disorder I have. However, I choose not to seek any assistance for this. My life was already transformed when I started to have out-of-body experiences a couple of years ago. They initially left me aghast, but led me to discover Bob Monroe's and your works. And with further phenomenal experience and study, I'm now extremely well and void of any existential dread. I still, however, feel incomplete and somewhat frustrated. I remain a swan, graceful on the surface, but pedaling like fury underneath. Progress to co-create my best reality is taking a disproportionate effort due to corrupt drivers. Um, this this condition that I have is akin to driving a sports car with a faulty engine and management system. The ability to master the power is undermined by random failings of, say, the stability controls. This just seems incredibly unfair and is rather like this. In seclusion and study, I understand, shall we say, the truth principles, and so naturally set my intention to apply them. But the minute I'm back amongst men, I become less of a man. I'm unable, perhaps through limited executive function, to retain the knowledge, and so easily fall into pettiness, fear, and ego, etc. This naturally leads to feelings of failure, though I do consolidate with the notion that some individuals chose incredibly different vehicles, lives, through which to accelerate learning in the physical. This principle I loosely discovered in the works of Dr. Michael Newton, but I failed to find anything else to support the idea. I'm therefore wondering if you could link or provide further insight as to why some individuated units of consciousness are challenged thus, and how best to tackle it. I think you answered a lot of that in just the previous question, but
Well,
might you have some particular advice for Pete?
yeah, it is related to the last question. He goes, he meditates, he does the right things, he understands the bigger picture. He has the out of bodies, so he has personal experience of the larger reality. And this is all in his knowing. This is all in his intellect. But then he gets back into the world of men. He gets back into that bustle and elbowing in the crowd and the rest of it. And he slips into, he says, pettiness and ego and fear, that sort of thing. And that's because that's where he is. Again, it's the intellectual understanding is not the process by which you evolve. Now, intellectual understanding can help point you in the right direction. So intellectual understanding is very valuable. It points you into the direction. And because of his intellectual understanding, he is aware of his problem. He is aware of his fear and ego and beliefs. And he looks at that and says, oh, how could I be that way? How could I do that way? I know better. You see, but there's a difference between knowing better and being better. So it's important to do that intellectual work in as much as it gives him the ability to see the problem. If he had not done any of that intellectual work, he'd just be, he'd just have the fear and the ego, and he never notice. It would just be normal. And of course, that's the way I should be. But the intellect tells him that's not the way I should be. So now he has to work on changing who he is, being different. And I've kind of explained that in many places, many times. How do you approach this? But for him, I'd say, because he is so aware, he should look at it two ways. One, he should be looking at himself as he interacts with other people. And as soon as he finds himself interacting from fear or ego, he should immediately stop, rein himself in, and tell himself, I don't want to be that way. Not tell himself, I don't want to act that way. This is not about behavior and acting. It's, I don't want to be that way. And then think about, why was I that way? Why did I start to get angry? Why did I get upset? Why did I feel put out? Why was I, in a peeve about something, or stressed about something, or anxious? And he will find that there's a fear that creates that negative feeling. And then deal with that fear. And you can deal with that fear in multiple ways. One, you can try to discover exactly what it is and what are the roots of it and why, how did you end up with that fear? And then let it go. Sometimes it's easier to let go if you know where it comes from. Another way is just to have a very strong intention. I don't want to be that way. And if that intention is strong and sincere and always in the front of your mind, then you'll do all the right things to not be that way. You'll just automatically figure it out and get rid of the fear. There's various ways to approach getting rid of fear. And, in my YouTube channel, I have thousands of videos. And now I have a device there, I have a tool there where you can look at just what you want to look at. And if you go to that tool and put in get rid of fear, you will get all sorts of little snippets out of videos will be referred to you, and it'll be just on that subject. So that would be really the place to go. Go find that tool. Go to the YouTube channel and look for that tool. And I think you can also find it on my website. If you don't get it at the YouTube channel, go to my website and get that tool, and then search. And you will have more discussion on how to get rid of fear than probably you have time to listen to. So that would be my suggestion. Anyway, the other way to look at it is, besides going to the source and trying to tear the fear up by the roots, is use your meditation. Use your meditation to, to go back to the source of that fear. Use your meditation to get to know that fear, to accept it, to say, okay, here's a fear of mine. I'm afraid that people don't take me seriously. I'm afraid that, people will find me not adequate. And that's the root fear that's causing the trouble. Then say, okay, what's the worst that could happen? Let's say the worst thing is that I am inadequate. And that's the worst thing that could possibly be true, is I really am inadequate. Then accept that and say, okay, if that's true, then it's me and it's the way I am. And if that's the way I am, then I own it. Now that I own it, I can get rid of it. You can't get rid of it till you own it. Just owning it is the first step. And then you can get rid of it by having the intention not to be that way. So you can do all of that more effectively in a meditation. So that would be the kind of the second approach, is through meditation. Work on getting rid of that fear. And you'll see that you'll get frustrated at first because you'll still have the fear, you'll still have the ego, and you'll think, well, it's just not working, but you're probably just being impatient. This is not a fast process. This process may take a year or more years. It could just take weeks, but it might take years. But let it take as long as it takes. Just keep after it until you succeed, however long that takes. And if after a couple of weeks or a couple of months you say, I don't see any success, well, just keep working at it. Success comes in time. It comes in with sincerity. It comes in really wanting to change who you are and how you interact. It'll work.
Thank you, Tom. Those were both very good questions. And I do want to mention, in all of our forward videos and all of the videos to follow, we will have a special little paragraph with a link to this search engine tool that's on Tom's website. We've been getting some really good reviews on it. So that will be within the description. And we hope you enjoy it. And thank you very much, Tom, for answering these questions today.
Oh, you're quite welcome, Donna. Tom Campbell here. I and MBT Events hope you liked this video. We now have well over 1,000 hours of free video on this user-friendly, ad-free YouTube channel. Though these videos are free to our viewers, they represent many thousands of hours in production and editing, and many thousands of dollars invested in video and audio equipment, along with the required computers and software to store and process the raw video into finished products. So far, all of this content has been funded directly out of our own pockets. Be assured, we will always continue to do what we can. It's our life, our purpose, a labor of love that we will continue to pursue as best we can. However, those pockets are not as deep as they used to be. Thus, we are now seeking to augment our resources with support from our viewers. If you find something of significant value in our videos, please consider supporting their production through our newly created Patreon account or through a one-time donation. The links are in the description below. Thank you.